So yesterday I was in an interview about Gamergate made by Tachyon Blue, and it was an interesting uh, debate. Well, it wasn't that much of a debate, but an interesting interview. But I think that there was like some things that I said in the interview that I would like to expand or revisit in some way because I think that in the interview format, I'm not as articulate as I should be because for people who follow my videos, you will probably know that I have the issue talking in English. That it's not my language, and I learn English and I understand English. I can follow conversations, but when it comes to talking in English, the issues that I kind of most of my brain is busy trying to decide how I'm going to say the things in English. So they make like coherent grammatical sense, and many times they don't, and I have to go back and say it again. And because I'm like busy doing that, I'm like not thinking about I'm more thinking about how I'm going to say something than thinking what I'm going to say, so to speak. So many times if you ask me a question or I have to say something like in the moment, like maybe I don't articulate the answers as well as I would like to say, but then if I have like a minute to think about it, I formulate the words and the phrases correctly in a coherent, understandable way. So when I talk on Twitter, on social media, or when I make articles, I have like a minute to decide if what I'm writing makes any sense, and I can go back and say maybe I will change this line so it all is all coherent. But in an interview format, I feel that there were several times in the interview that maybe I was asked something or I said something, and I was more like rambling, not being very articulate, going back to say a word again because I said it badly, and in the end, I didn't explain things the way I wanted. There were sometimes as well that maybe we jumped too fast from one question to the other, and I have more to say, but maybe it required more time. So I wanted to like do like a video and pick up a couple of things and try to formulate them now that I have time to try to for them to be coherent. I don't know how much coherent it will be because I think that one of the issues that I don't know if to call it an issue because probably in the book he will have already explained a lot of concepts and people will have read other interviews and maybe they know what are we talking about. But I feel that the interview a lot of things that I gave for granted that I didn't need to explain or explain too much because uh, like he knew all of the terminology that I was using and what was I was talking about, and the people listening probably knew what I was talking about. So there was like not much need to go into detail, but at the same time, then like later I thought if someone who doesn't know about Gamergate or what we mean by woke or what we mean by modern video games going down or whatever, like we are not explaining too much. So I will probably like it to be like explain this kind of the issue that I have. I said in the interview they had that issue with the airplay documentary that they don't really go to explain things in a coherent way. So I ended up dropping watching the video. So I kind of want to go over that a little. And one of the things is that there's a lot of things in the conversation that I think I defaulted to talk about how things that the anti-gamer side of the developers were doing because of virtue signaling and maybe or wokeness and maybe I should go about that a little. Like I think that probably the first thing I should have done is the first time that the woke word came out, I should have just stopped there and say, wait, I'm going to explain what I mean by wokeness because it's a topic that is argued about a lot on the internet, and I think my perspective is a little different from other people as well. So it's probably good to have that out of the way first, and I didn't. So wokeness for me, the way that I define it, like people argue a lot about this on the internet, like, and they usually, when they try to talk about wokeness, they talk about certain ideas that comes from the progressive left, like, and they start to talk about injecting LGBT, uh, not LGBT itself, or like the crazy LGBT ideas that come from certain camps that are way too radical, or pandering to identities like racial identity or sexual identity or gender and things like that. And maybe they'll talk about transsexualism, and they mix a lot of topics that sometimes don't make sense that they will be together, and that is used by the other side, so to speak, to say, oh, you can't define it, or these things are contradictory, so you don't know what they're talking about. But the thing is that the mistake that I think that people make is try to define wokeness as an ideology, because that's not what it is. Like wokeness, the way I define it is performativity. It's basically woke people, and by woke people I don't mean like the left. I establish a distinction. Like the left is a very big group of a lot of different political ideologies that often are in complete odds at each other because they say completely opposite things. And I technically I will be, if we look in that spectrum, I will be like a center left. So what I mean is specifically a certain section of the left that is like what I define as the woke, which are people who their interest is to prompt themselves up morally. Like they want to be morally superior and present as morally superior, and the way that they talk is always designed so they always come on top morally. Like in the past, when they didn't have these terms, I usually call these people the unlike me's, because if you could add at the end of their phrases unlike me, like I knew people that everything they say you could put at the end unlike me, like, oh, this is racist because X or Y, and you could add at the end unlike me, because the intention of what they say was to prompt themselves up. That's what virtue signaling is. I say virtue signaling a lot in the interview, because it's basically saying things not because you believe in them, not because you have any idea to change it, not because even you want to change it, or even think that it is bad, but you have to say those things, because if you say those things, they will make you look good. It's basically bad people pretending to be good, because many of these people say those things because they have skeletons in the closet, so to speak. Like some of them were trolls or very edgy a few years ago, and now they have like it's called like troll remorse, and they want to try to erase all of the things that they say, the jokes that they said, by no presenting as very very progressive and such. And there's also the difference that wokeness is, I would say, is specifically when you do it using progressive ideas, because you can also do virtue signaling with other ideas. Like there are Christian people who do virtue signaling with the Bible and things like that, saying what the Bible says that you should do. But specifically, wokeness will be picking progressive ideas, because those are the ideas that right now give you the moral superiority, and using those ideas to prompt yourself up. So there are a lot of people, like woke people, basically don't care about, they don't see, if they talk about black people, they don't care about black people. They just care that defending Black Lives Matter when Black Lives Matters was in effect, that was what made them look like a good person, and they wanted to either hide something, or simply feel morally superior to everyone else, because that is like a kick. uh, and but that's why there is a difference between someone who is a progressive and really believes in some things. And I think that sometimes, in a few cases, might be difficult to see the difference, but in most cases, I think that you can see, especially when they contradict each other. Like, for example, you have a person who defends, like, oh, I can defend women, and women are always right, and you know, all of the feminist stuff. But then at the same time, when the topic of, for example, transsexuals in sports arise, they go like, oh, but trans women have to be in women's sports. And those two things are actually contradictory. Like, if you are like a super defendant of women's rights, and you defend that women need to have their own spaces with no men in them, I think that it's more logical that you will be opposed to transsexuals be in sports, and that's why I believe that TERFs, I don't like TERFs, but TERFs I think that are more, like, I wouldn't qualify TERFs as woke people, because TERFs are basically feminists who have decided to say things that uh, put themselves in a morally inferior position right now, because they speak about against trans people in sports or trans people in female bathrooms, and those things right now don't give you like moral points. But and they have decided to speak against those things because they probably really believe in the feminist things that they say. That's kind of the distinction that I made. And you also have like the same person who says they defend women and they defend transsexuals in female sports also will defend all of the infinite genders and non-binary stuff, which also contradicts transsexual theory. So all of these things are ideas that are basically in opposition. Like transsexual is kind of in opposition to non-binary and multiple genders, and it's also in opposition to like the strong feminist position of transsexuals can be in sports. All of those things are in opposition. And for a person who is progressive, they will probably defend just one of these things. Like they will defend like there are gender and sexuality and sex is just a thing that you decide, so they will be against transsexual theories, and they will be against many feminist theories, and a person who is like a TERF will be against transsexuals and all of that stuff. But a woke person supports all of those things at the same time because they don't really believe in them. They just want the internet points, the internet moral points, and the moral superiority that gives them to be in favor of the good thing, so to speak, at the correct time. So if the topic of transsexuals in sports arises because there is like a viral case with some transsexual that was expelled or something like that, they have to say they are super in favor of transsexuals in sports. If the topic of if something viral happens with non-binaries, they automatically switch to speak in favor of the non-binary on the multiple genders, even when the thing that they are probably arguing in favor is like at odds with transsexual people who are speaking against that. And all of this, they simply always will say, and the same with race, like they are not for Hispanic people, black people, or X type of people. They will simply, if there is a topic that arises in which a black person is like the victim, they will be like for black people, even if that puts them at odds with Hispanic people because the issues with Hispanic people or whatever. They will just try to look for which is the thing that gives them more points. And a way you can see this is there's a very funny thing that happens that when a topic arises that there isn't an established position yet from the woke left, like a new thing happens that has never happened before, you have like a period of like a day in which woke people don't express themselves in what position they are. Because at that point, they aren't sure what is the pre approved position from their side. And they are afraid that if they express themselves in favor of one of the two sides, they will pick the wrong side, and that will put them at odds in the next day. So there's like a period in which the thing happens, and the woke left is like silent, and then like slowly there is a position that becomes like more prominent, and at that moment suddenly you have like 1,000 million of woke people defending that position, copy pasting the exact text of whatever tweet was viral saying that thing. And that happens all the time. That's why many times in the conversation, I defaulted to uh, like saying that, oh, this is, maybe they take you and ask me things like, oh, how journalists could have done something different or what we could have done different. And for me, it was more like it doesn't matter because I think that most of the people who were against Gamergate on its day weren't people who really believed that Gamergate was like a very bad thing. I mentioned it in the discussion that I have actually only met one person anywhere, like in real life or the internet. Like, I only met one person, and that was a journalist, so game journalist. So I think that's normal that they will defend game journalists. But I only met one person who, when asked if they think that game journalism is doesn't have issues and is like ethical and is good, they say yes, I believe that game journalism is good. Like everyone else, not doesn't matter how much of an anti-gamer they were. If you ask them specifically that question, they will say, no, I agree that games journalism is bad, and even normal journalism is bad, and they are fucking shit most of the time. They just attacked Gamergate on the harassment angle and the you hate women angle and you hate minorities angle, which was a completely made up argument. But it allows them to virtue signal that they were good people. And probably I should mention what Gamergate was, because I don't want to commit the same mistake of talking about things when people don't know what they are. But I'm going to just ultra summarize, because it will be like super long. It basically was like a movement that arises in 2014 that was against unethical games journalism, because game journalism was very bad. I think that today everyone knows that, but at the time there was like more like we started saying that at that time. And then there was like a counter to the movement that they started saying out of nowhere that, oh no, you don't care about game journalism, you just hate women and don't want women to play video games, or you want black people to not play video games. That was nothing that no one in Gamergate ever said, but they suddenly started saying that. And at the time, we were like trying to defend ourselves and say, wait, that has nothing to do with what we say. We're saying that game journalism is bad, and maybe later the conversation switch a little to we would like politics not be injected in games journalism or video games, because we want just to play and read if the game is good or bad, not about if Bayonetta is sexist, which was an article from Polygon. So we kind of have like that conversation, and at the time we tried to argue with these people, but time after I came to the realization that it didn't matter what we said, because the reason those people and those journalists were accusing Gamergate of being X or Y is because that allowed them to virtue signal. They were basically like before they were called woke people, they were the woke people. At the time, they were called like social justice warriors, but it's different terminology for the same thing. Like they simply wanted to prompt themselves up as the morally superior, and they saw a target that allowed them very easily to do that. They could claim that gamers, and specifically Gamergate, was like a harassment campaign that wants women out of gaming and things like that. And as long as they all say the same thing, they gaslighted people with their articles into believing this was the case. They had the moral high ground, and they could always win internet moral points by talking about Gamergate in a negative light and talking about gamers in a negative light, saying that they were X or Y. And that's why I default through the whole interview a lot of times to like this was because of virtue signaling. I think we could have changed nothing and things like that, because it didn't really depend on us. Like we could have done a lot of different things, and they would have done exactly the same because they didn't care. They didn't even disagree that games journaling was bad, and they just wanted to virtue signal. And changing to a different thing, there is also a point in which I think I wasn't very articulate. At what point, I don't remember the exact question, but we were talking about how modern video games had gone worse and such, and he made me a question kind of like, prove to me that that is the case, that all of these like ideas, the woke ideas have made games worse. And I think I started kind of to ramble a little. I know that I started to mention the sexy thing, like how video games today, the sexy designs in the West are toned down by a lot. But in my mind, when I was saying it, I realized that that was probably the argument that basically everyone else have done, and I didn't want to go that route because I wanted to. There is much more to the topic, and I wanted to talk about different things. So I started to try to reformulate what I was saying, but I was struggling to structure because it's a very complex topic and requires laying the ground for it. I was kind of struggling at the moment to put my thoughts into a coherent order that wouldn't take like hours to explain. To explain how that the ideology will make everything. Even now, I'm kind of struggling because it's a complex topic, but I'm going to try to go a little like from the beginning. So the issue is that for modern games and such is that they now follow a current of thought that was introduced by the likes of Anita Sarkeesian. She introduced not only the idea that games are sexist and such, but she also introduced. She was one of the main proponents of a branch of feminism that was intersectional feminism, which at the time was like a small branch, but and I think mostly because of her, it caused a lot of strength, and became in the end dominated the entire feminist dialogues. And right now, the dominant feminist ideology is intersectional feminist, is the one that dominates Spanish politics as well. Like they are literally in the government and they have a ministry of equality and things like that. And that is the line of feminists that says that everything is mixed up, so they have to talk not only about women issues, but also the racial and the sexual identity issues and non-binary. And I think that ideology has got a lot of strength precisely because I was mentioning about woke people. Like it allows precisely wokeness. It allows to pick every single topic that is related to progressivism and mix it all and talk about it at the same time, even if it clashes with each other, because it all allows you to look good. So it got strange and became dominant. Now, the thing about that is that metastasized into video game design in the West. And not only video games, but also other all types of media, basically, like movies, literature, and everything. And the issue with that is that what you generate when you introduce that into storytelling is that you switch the focus of creating good characters and creating good story to do pandering, because pandering is what allows you to do the virtue signaling, is what allows you to say to people, oh, I'm pro woman and I'm pro black people and Hispanic people or homosexual people. So kinda the stories and the developers switch their gaming storytelling philosophy and even gameplay philosophy to inclusivity and pandering. And I know it's a topic that is a little kind of hard to explain. So I'm trying to find a way to, because there are different ways that they can go about this. I mean, you have to have, the thing is that pandering, this kind of way of doing things, it attracts people, so that's why it's attractive. Because it's not just that you get to prompt yourself, it's that by doing so, you, at least temporarily, you attract people to whatever you are doing. And that people is a different topic if that people is going to give money or they're going to give money in the long run. I think there's a lot of products in which you can see that there is an influx of people temporarily and then it goes down. Like the MCU is a good example because you have a lot of people going to the movies, but then the comics are dying. They sell shit. So those people who are going into the MCU are not consuming comics, are not giving money to the comic industry. And you have a lot of things like, for example, Black Panther comes in and they do a lot of pandering to black people. So black people go like, oh, yes. And they go the only reason they go is because there's black protagonists. And the movie's shit, but they all love it because black protagonists. But then you see the rest of the next movies and series of the MCU, they try the same thing, like brutal pandering to black people, like the next Black Panthers movies and the Captain America and the Winter Soldier series, this, they try like the same things over and over and over again, and each time they got like less money and less people watching, because the moment that the novelty of the pandering wears out, people realize that the stories are shit because they are focusing on things that don't make for good stories. So basically almost everyone agrees that the MCU is shit, and people don't Like in the first Captain Marvel movie, they try the strategy of if you don't like this movie, you are sexist, and people went to see the movie just because they had to go see the movie because it's the new feminist movie. And then the second movie comes out and no one goes to see it because the novelty is out. You don't have to go anymore to defend it because feminism, and people don't like the movie just because there is three women in it. It- And I think that another example could be like the what happened with the Witch of Mercury series in anime. It's like a Gundam anime, and Gundam is a series that has existed since the 80s. It has a very strong and loyal fan base that is worried mostly about like the dark type of story, the politics, the mechs, the Gumpla, these figures that you construct yourself, and things like that. And the newest series, it's a series that the director said that he wanted to do it differently because he said in an interview he had met with social studies students, and they have told him that they don't like Gundam, and he had to change X things to for them to like it. So he changed things. He made a Gundam series that is different from usual, and the main two characters are a lesbian couple, but not at the beginning. Like this is just happens at the end of the series, but at the beginning it was like maybe they could be at some point like a lesbian couple. And when people knew that, there was like a huge influx of new people who didn't, they weren't interested about Gundam at all, and you could see this looking at the conversations. Like they didn't. When there was talk about the new episode, there was never talk about the mechs or the story or the characters. It was always like, oh, my two lesbian characters have done this today together, and it was all like that. And those people then didn't go to buy the Gumplas and things like that. There was just that influx, and when the series finished, those people went out, completely left the Gundam conversations, and all Gundam conversations went back to be about older series, and this series was like forgotten. So basically, doing that pandering to like the LGBT community brought up people momentarily, and then those people left, and they don't continue there to give money to the franchise. They left, but doing that may temporarily give the impression that that's the way you have to go. So then stories, that's I think what happened like 10 years ago or something like that, that companies saw that this kind of pandering brings people momentarily, and but they didn't realize that on the long run it was going to be bad. So the way that this kind of making stories this way has taken down products, especially in video games and things like that, is because if you focus what you are doing into pandering, into virtue signaling, you are doing it in disfavor, so to speak. I don't know if I'm using words right, but in disfavor of like things like the story or even the gameplay, and I will go about that later. But the story, or even aesthetics, like the main argument that people usually do is the one that about how in the West right now female characters are all ugly. Even if the models that they are using for reference for the character are pretty, they uglify them in the final version. So there's kind of right now like and the whole aesthetic of Western video games is like ugly, and maybe some people are not interested in the aesthetics, but I think that aesthetics is very important for humans, and I think that's a relevant part of a game. I have consumed a lot of video games just for the aesthetics, so that's important. But I want to go to other things, not just that. And for example, the plot of the stories. If you focus it on virtue signaling and pandering, the story has to be worse because you have to introduce characters where maybe they don't belong, and there are a lot of stories like they do a series about the Vikings, and suddenly one of the Vikings is a black woman, and one of the leaders is a black woman. It's like obviously it's not possible, or you have to. I talk in the interview about how Kingdom Come Deliverance is a game that was created to be an hyper realistic version of medieval Yugoslavia, And woke people started to demand that the protagonist has to be a woman, and some people say that the protagonist has to be a black person. And it was like, how are you going to have? You want a black female protagonist in medieval Yugoslavia in a realistic game? Like, obviously, it doesn't match. So for starters, you have to do things like that, or you have to do things like one thing that they do a lot in modern stories is they replace the old heroes who were maybe like white striped males. They have to change them into women, black women, Hispanic. You have to change. So basically, to do that, they have to push down characters who were popular and people liked, and they have to know make them they know they are like the deadbeat dad or the drunk or they die and things like that, and they put new characters that aren't interesting. They aren't interesting because the whole focus of the characters is virtue signaling, and is they basically uh, like if they introduce a woman, that woman cannot have defects. You cannot have a bad personality. She cannot fail. She has to always win. She defeats all of her enemies without effort, because doing otherwise will be sexist. Because, oh, you are saying that woman can do this or that woman has this defect. This happened a lot at the beginning. Maybe not so much now because there is a push against it, but it happened a lot that maybe they introduce a black character, and if the black character did something bad, there was like a huge cancellation attempt because, oh, you are saying that all black people is this. There are actors in Hollywood who are actors from color, and they say that they want to play villains, but they can't because in Hollywood they say, no, no, you can't play a villain because you are black, you are Indian, or whatever. You can't play a villain. So basically, what you're creating is a type of characters that cannot have defects. They are perfect. They cannot be the villain. There are movies in which you know who is the villain because of the skin color. Like there were a lot of memes in Rings of Power because everyone knew who Sauron was simply because he was the only white male, heterosexual white male. So he had to be Sauron, and he was Sauron. And in Eternals, it's the same. There's like a twist of who is the traitor, and it's like everyone knows he's going to be the white dude, and he was the white dude who was the traitor. So it becomes very, very predictable, and the characters. Many times they also, especially if they are a woman, they are assholes because the creators confuse having a strong personality with being an asshole, and they have to create strong female characters, so they have to be assholes. So their personalities are very, very bad. So there's a lot of those things that bring down a story because the story has to be focused. And many times, for example, if there's a black person, the story suddenly if has to be about black oppression, or if there is a gay, it has to be about the LGBT oppression. It cannot be stories about what the people like. People go to see like a robot story, Transformers or whatever, and half the story is about oppression to Hispanic people. And it's like, I want to see Megatron beating the crap of other Transformers, but you have to see half a story that you are not interested in because they have to do this pandering and virtue signaling. So well like that in all movies and in video games as well. I think you can see that in modern times as well, that they change races of things and they change characters of sex, and the stories go in that route. And I will also say that I think this haven't been said too much, and that it also affects gameplay because when you introduce certain ideas about what I mean about inclusivity, pandering, virtue signaling, you also have to do that in gameplay concept. Because, for example, there is this whole discussion that pops up a lot of time about how games has to be easier, like the difficulty debate, that there's a lot of it. There's like the woke section say that the games have to be easier because if games are hard, that's an inclusivity issue because the people who can't, who aren't good at playing, or who have like one arm less or bad sight or something like that, they can't play, which is usually disproved by people who do those things, even if they have only one hand, things like that. But the thing is that comes from that philosophy. Like, if you want to virtue signal like the people who are saying that, they aren't saying it because they really believe that if you make a game that is hard, it's an inclusivity issue. They don't believe that, but they have to say that, because if they say that, it makes them look good. So you have a lot of people saying that. You have a lot of people saying that, and some of that people go into the development of the games. But you're going to find, and I talk about in the interview, that nowadays the old guard of developers has been kicked out and replaced by woke people, and that woke people has those ideas about pandering and all of that, and virtue signaling. So they have to do these changes and make games easier for, because that's like the inclusivity thing. Like, make the game easier and it's more inclusive because more people can play it. So games are more and more easy each time. And I think that everyone agrees that now games are super easy. They also have a lot of hand holding. Like for example, there was this thing in God of War, and there is in God of War that there is a character with you that is that's she's also, speaking about the previous topic, she's a Nordic character who is a black woman, of course, and she's like all the time telling you what you have to do at all times, and people were like, "Dude, let me explore the world," or something, like, let me think by myself how to solve this puzzle. But it's like, no, she's all the time telling you, you have to do this in this way, push this here, and do then this, and all the time. So it's heavy on the, or the Resident Evil games. There was also this joke about how recent games have, like, everywhere you have to go is like painted with like yellow arrows pointing you to go here and go here and go here. It's like, I mean, they are in games that have like a lot of exploration, so it's not exactly very hard to deduce where you have to go. Let me at least that small level of liberty. Don't tell me go here all the time. So that goes into game philosophy, and there's a lot of discussion about how games like Resident Evil games are easier now, and a lot of games are easier now, and people want the From Software games to be also easier, even if the whole point of the game is that they are hard, and it's for people who want hard games. And an example that I wanted to use in the interview, but I didn't get to use it correctly because we switched a little to the inclusivity dialogue and we switched to another question. So I want to expand on it. If it's the recent Spider-Man game, Spider-Man 2 game. So in that game, you can kind of see all of the issues that I have talked about, and also the inclusivity thing. Then, in case you don't know, in the Spanish version of the game, the characters talk in inclusive language. Inclusive language, I'm not going to go too deep on this because I made a video to explain this, and it was like a 40-minute long video because it's a very complex topic. So I'm just going to say that the Spanish language is gendered, but it also has ways to speak in a neutral way. But feminists in Spain, the way that they have to virtue signal is to claim that they don't like the neutrals in our language, and they want us to use a different type of neutrals. So they want to force what they call inclusive language, which is, you have probably seen Latinx. Like, they want us to use X when we are talking and things like that. And it's like, in many cases, it's simply impossible to talk like that. Yeah, you can't have a normal conversation and be talking like, yeah, my Latinx friends, like with X all the time and things like that. And this game has parts of it that are in that with that kind of dialect, and it's very cringe. It's hard to explain to an English person because you are not going to know what the characters are saying. But for us, there was a huge backlash against that because it's super cringe to listen to it. It sounds very bad, and it doesn't make any sense because they could have just used the neutral terms that Spanish already has. So Spanish is already inclusive in that way. You don't need new forms of neutral with an X that cannot be pronounced and things like that, or the A, which is another thing that they use sometimes. So if the thing is that if you look at the Spider-Man game, you see a lot of these issues, like the female characters, for example, are very ugly, and there's also apparently like the character of Mary Jane looks the same as the writer of the game, so there may be like a self-insert thing over there, although I cannot be sure about that, but it may be. And it's like the characters are kind of ugly, and the story pushes down on Peter Parker, like they try to make Peter look bad, and like the character, like Mary Jane talks bad about him, and Miles Morales talks bad about him, and there is a point in which he says that he's probably better if he's not Spider-Man and only Miles Morales is Spider-Man. And when that happened, I mentioned it that, like on Twitter, that what they probably were trying to do is replace Peter Parker with Miles Morales to do the thing that they always do. Like, we're going to be inclusive, virtue signaling, we're going to replace the white dude with the black person. And people call me crazy, and on the internet say it's impossible. And then a week later, Insomniac announced that they're going to replace Peter Parker with Miles Morales in all of their future games. So basically, yes, that's exactly what we're doing, and you could see that perfectly in the game. They also, another thing, for example, speaking about what I talked earlier about how it also affects game mechanics. There were missions in the first game that were like the Mary Jane missions that were kind of like infiltration missions, and nobody liked them. Like, everyone hate those things. It was the most hated thing in the game. In the second game, there's even more missions like that, and there is an interview to I think it was the director, and he said that he didn't care. Like, he knew that the most hated aspect of the first game was those missions, but he didn't care, and he was going to put more missions because I don't remember the exact words, but he made this kind of, it's 2023 and women deserve their place in video games. So basically, he made all of those missions that everyone hates just because he wanted to virtue signal about how feminist his game was, because Mary Jane was as much as a protagonist. And I think he said that Mary Jane is as much of a protagonist as Peter Parker. Spider-Man is the name of the game, mind you. So it affects game mechanics as well. It's also not a particularly difficult game, so I probably the same thing applies, that they made the game easy because they want to apply the philosophy that everyone can play and things like that. And there's also the thing with the flags, which I don't really care much about the flags, because flags, I mean, if they are going to try to represent a modern, I don't know if it's Manhattan, I don't know if it's Manhattan or whatever place it is, but a modern United States big city is probably going to have gay flags. But it is an issue when you put the gay flags to virtue signal in the West, but then you take them out in any country that is actually against gay people, because it makes very obvious that you're just virtue signaling. Because if you really were in favor, you were doing that because you want to promote gay people and want to help gay people, you will keep those flags in the countries that need the opinions about gay people to change. But instead, you do it in the United States in an era in which being gay actually gives you points rather than being something bad. So it's very obvious that it's virtue signaling. And for the people who doesn't like, because many times when you see something, it's not the thing itself, but rather the act. Like, I don't care about the flags themselves. It's just flags, and I have nothing against gay people. But the act of knowing that the flags are there because it's virtue signaling, it puts a very bad taste in your mouth. It's like when all of this thing, if you remember about the Starfield pronouns happens, I made a comment like that. Like, I don't care. Like, the pronouns things is like something that I will click to ignore in the game and keep playing. And maybe this guy, I don't remember the YouTuber who did the rant. Like, yes, the rant itself was kind of over the top, but I understand the underlying issues. Like, the reason, everyone knows that the reason those pronouns are there is just to make virtue signaling. And when you are trying to play a game to escape from real life, so to speak, and you start to see the things thrown at you that are just for virtue signaling, it's kind of leaves so much bad taste in your mouth that it kind of takes you away from the game. And that's something that I don't like. And also, when you allow these things that are small, then in the future, what you are doing is allowing that the Overton window moves, and in the future, there will be worse things. So I don't think that when people complain about things that are like small, like, let's say, the flags or the pronouns, that on itself is like, okay, this like a small dumb thing that doesn't matter. I think that most people will complain about these things because it's like, if I allow this, what is the next thing? And then if I allow the next thing, what is the next thing? And all things like that. And in the end, I think we have seen in practical terms what that means, because nowadays, like, the stories in movies and video games are horrible, and it's because the Overton window has been moving. There are certain things that are not allowed, certain things that you have to do, certain things that you have to say, characters have to be done in certain ways, and not like that. And that's what make that nowadays you see a AAA video game, you know that it's going to have the same gameplay mechanics as all AAA games, like this Assassin's Creed third-person perspective, over-the-shoulder game with open world, with the characters are ugly, and you are gonna have LGBT things thrown at you all the time, and your favorite characters will be made like horrible to be substituted by, because it's the combination of things. It's not one thing. It's not that you see like one game has this one small thing or what an issue. No, it's that this establishes itself as the status quo, as it has. It's not the status quo right now. It establishes itself as the status quo. And once that's happened, basically most games and most movies, most stories are crap, because they all do these things and they do several of these things at the same time, and it's always worse. It always gets worse. It's always a new thing until you get your things like Barbie, because Barbie is like a super, in your face proselytist, anti-male movie, and like you get more and more and more, and Barbie now has been successful, because it has been successful mostly because of the advertising campaign. People thought it was going to be just a fun movie, meta movie, and then it was like this hardcore feminist power fantasy. And now, because that movie has been successful, we're probably going to have a lot of more movies that are done in the exact same way, and it's going to be horrible to watch the future movies that all follow in the same formula, the same way that they all follow in the MCU formula. And things are going to be worse and worse, because the Overton window will keep moving to worse and worse thing. And that's kind of the issue that a lot of these things have. And another thing that I want to clarify is that there are probably people listening to this, or listening to these arguments, that will say, but I like the Spider-Man game, or I like this other game. But the thing is that you may like a game because of certain things, like maybe the gameplay, you like how it plays, or you like certain aspects. What you have to think is, how much better would that game be if things were different? Like Spider-Man, for example, is like, oh, maybe I like the gameplay. I played the first game, and it's like, it's an easy game, but it's kind of fun to jump through the buildings and beat up a lot of people. It's like, okay. But how much better would have the Spider-Man 2 game be if had that gameplay, but also it was a little more challenging, and also didn't have like the Mary Jane missions, and also the designs were aesthetically pleasing, and also the story was an actually good story, and it wasn't substituting Peter Parker for an inclusive character and things like that. If the game didn't have all of those things, it would obviously be a better game than it is, even if you like the game as it is now. So that's kind of my argument as well. That there are a lot of things that and I have played games that I have liked certain things, but they suddenly throw some virtue signaling stuff in your face, and it's like the game would have been much better if it didn't have uh, all of these things. And also, people tend to forgive a lot of things that games and game companies do because of pandering. Like, you see the whole Blizzard thing, how every time they have like a scandal, they release a new LGBT character, and people, well, not all people, because there's a section of the internet that doesn't forget, but there are like a lot of people. I think that it hadn't become a meme. Right now, it has become a meme that Blizzard does this, and because it has become a meme, it doesn't work as well. But if it hadn't become a meme, it works. Like, something bad happens, they release a new gay character, the whole media talks only about the new gay character, and no one talks about how Blizzard employees raped 5 women, for example. I'm making that up, but it's just, I think they have like a lot of accusations like that, but I just put like an example just to say something. And I think that a lot of people see video games that have a lot of dumb stuff, but then they forget all of the bad things because it has X or Y. Baldur's Gate is probably a good example because the worst part of the game by far is the romance. It's very badly done. Like all of the characters are player sexual, and the conversations romance-wise are super cringe. And many of the conversations are cringe in general because they are focused on the characters being like super in love with you from the second one and wanting to have sex with you from second one, no matter who you are, even if you're a lizard. And that makes the characters to have less personality, less identity. So it's a part that is very, very badly done, and it has a lot of things that woke people will criticize normally, like being very, very openly sexual. It has things that are basically porn, literally porn, but they praise those things. Why? Because it's LGBT. So because it panders to the LGBT crowd, it doesn't matter that the romance is crap. It doesn't matter that it could have been done a lot better. It doesn't matter that the characters are weighed down because of how bad these dialogues are done. It doesn't matter that you can. It doesn't make sense that you can have sex with people from second one. Like none of these matters at all. Even the things that they hate, like the game being like openly sexual, it doesn't matter because it's LGBT. Like people forgive these things because LGBT. So that's another reason why you have all of this pandering, because with pandering, people forgive things, and then you have even more pandering and more bad writing justified with pandering. And all of these things are kind of what I would have liked to have structured during my conversation in that interview. But as you have seen, like this video is very long already. So I tried kind of in my mind, I was trying to explain all of this that I have explained, but I was trying to explain it in like 2 minutes, and it's impossible. So I was trying to structure that in my head, and I was struggling to find a way to how the fuck I say these things that will normally take such amount of explanation to say correctly in like the 2 3 minutes that I'm going to have to answer this question probably. And I don't know, maybe I should have tried to. I mean, the thing is, I don't know how much time he had also to do the interview, but maybe I should have tried to put a stop, like say, no, wait, don't go to the next question. I want to expand on this, or maybe I should have tried to revisit it later when I have in my mind think about other things that I could have said. Maybe I could have said, wait, I want to explain a little what I mean by wokeness, or explain a little what I mean by games today being worse. Also, there's a lot of censorship. I think I mentioned this in the interview. There is a lot of censorship, especially when games come from Japan, but also in the West. We mentioned a lot of examples of game companies releasing designs, especially sexy designs, and then getting like brutally attacked until they have to change the designs, like Larian did with Original Sin and things like that. And when games come from Japan, they are censored most of the time. I did a panel at a convention about censorship in video games, and this was like in 2015 or 16. And even back then, I could do an entire panel of like an hour just speaking about things that were censored in video games in recent years. Like in 2013, 14, 15, there were already so much censored games that I could do a panel with an hour of long. So imagine the amount of examples that I have now that things have gotten even worse. There's a lot of examples of censorship and things like that. So that's kinda why, but I meant back then, like this wokeness injected into video games, largely by fault of Anita Sarkeesian and games journalists at the time of Gamergate, was has made video games be worse in general in the West, and that's why Japanese games are now like having their second golden age, so to speak, because you have things like Nier Automata that throws in like a super sexy character. Well, both characters. I mean, Nines is considered very sexy for women. He's like a twink, I think it's called. So it has like sexy characters for both sexes, and also introduces a super good story that doesn't pull any punches. Like it goes into philosophy and it goes even into politics, but it's not proselytistic. It's like it analyzes a lot of things and has a lot of subversions. It had a subversion of feminism, but I think that I haven't seen any feminist yet complain about the subversion of feminism that Nier Automata does, which means that they haven't even realized that the game does a subversion of feminism. But okay, so yeah, that's talk a lot about them, but it has a lot of those things, and I think that's something that you couldn't make in the West. That you can't make right now in the West a game that makes that kind of commentary about feminism or certain ideologies and also has sexy characters and all of this stuff. I think you can't really do that in the West because you are not allowed. Maybe if you are an indie, but even if you are an indie, like you are not going to have the support of the gaming media because you are not going to talk about you. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of companies have to do things certain ways to virtue signal and because they are going to be destroyed if they don't. Indies have some more freedom, but they are going to be destroyed if they do X or Y things. Like look at this game that came out recently. I don't remember the name. That the game where the protagonists are two evil twins or brothers. I don't know, remember if they are twins. And there's one of the endings in which there is like incest sex between them, and they got attacked so much, and they got dogs, and they had to sell the game to escape the internet because they were attacked like constantly, and because they decided to make a game that made like a part of it sexual and taboo, so to speak. And I find those kind of stories interesting because they kind of explore those taboos and the characters are supposed to be evil. It's not like the game is telling you do an incest. No, that's not what the game says. But yeah, that thing happens when you try to do that in the West, and that's why we live in what I call the games code authority. That there is no open official censorship from the government. If you don't know, the Comics Code Authority was a thing many years ago in which comic companies decided to establish like a code of things that you couldn't do or you have to do in comics. And if you didn't do them, like you didn't get censored in that no one came and took away the comic that you were doing. But if you did, uh, like editorials will not publish you, magazines will not talk about you, no one will work with you anymore. So it was kind of like you couldn't do. There are certain things that couldn't be done, even if it wasn't like the government doing anything or no one forbidding you for doing them, because if you did them, your career was over and you couldn't do things anymore. And I think that we are in that exact state in video games right now. And that all comes precisely from this woke ideology, focusing everything on we want to virtue signal, attacking people to pretend that we are superior to them and we are morally superior. It all comes from that kind of ideas. And that's what I wanted to make clear because in the interview you don't see me say that. I don't know if I have been much clear in this conversation because I still have the issue of talking English like a drunken dog, but I hope I have made myself a little more clear with those things and you understand why they are complex enough that I couldn't really go about them the way I wanted in the interview. So if you like the video, you can follow the channel or you can follow my Patreon. I am Kukuruyo basically in every social media, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever place. So if you want to find me, just grab that name and goodbye.